All right, good morning, everyone. We're going to start our Bible class. Alicia and I and the kids were gone last week. And so Marshall graciously filled in for me. And while we were gone, our little niece just loved to cuddle, especially Alicia and myself, and she had a little sniffles. And we were like, oh, it's just a little kid sickness. But apparently it was not just a little kid sickness. So Alicia and I we've been battling a cold for this last whole week since we've been back. So if I'm up here hacking and coughing, that's why. Nobody touch me today, okay? Keep your distance. But last week, what Marshall tells me is that you guys went all the way through chapter 6 and most of chapter 7. Anyone that was here, I hadn't had a chance to watch Marshall's class, and so what did he talk about? What did Marshall kind of focus on in these chapters about the flood? Casey? There was a lot of numbers.
There was age of Noah and just kind of matching up, which was really interesting too, because some of like thank you. Would probably have been alive and everything. It was kind of interesting.
Yeah. Just about how, it wasn't like this person lived 900 some odd years and then it was the next person. It kind of had this stair step thing. So it was like they were all living together for a really large portion of this time with all the other billions of people that were on the earth up to that point. And many of them would have met. We just kind of naturally assume that, like this person is mentioned in the Bible, then they must have been faithful. Apparently not, because it was only Noah and his family that were saved. And so all of these people that we read about that were living, some odd number, long number of years met their end with the flood. Rod?
Well, I was going to say basically the same thing, except that it's amazing how many forefathers were alive at the time of the flood.
Yeah, we don't normally think about that.
Also, how could you fit that many animals on the ark where you don't have to take one of every single bird, you take one bird family.
That's right. Anything else Marshall talk about? And that seems on topic. So he must have done a better job than I do of keeping us on topic.
He did talk about through one man, the world was saved.
Uh-huh.
Kind of correlated that to Christ.
Okay, so he's bringing some of it forward to, I don't know, following the lineage, right, of Christ, sure. All right. Well, we're going to pick it up in verse 17 of chapter 7. This is after in chapter 6 you have the instructions for the ark. In chapter 7 there's a lot of talk about the animals, and then right before this section we start to see the rain in the waters of the deep giving up their water, and so the flood has happened. Verses 17 through 24, it says this: The flood continued 40 days on the earth. The waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. The waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, all swimming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. Everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left and those who were with him in the ark. And the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. The description that we are given in these passages is so complete and specific that it is impossible to reconcile the flood that is talked about in the Bible to a local flood. If this were not a global flood, there wouldn't be any need for an ark, right? God would have told Noah instead, take all these animals and go this place or that place that wasn't going to be underwater. If it was only a local flood, then God's promise to never again bring such a flood would be false, right? Because we have local floods all the time. If this were only a local flood, then the Bible was wrong when it traces all the humanity back to Noah's sons. What we see through the historical record is that literally hundreds of people groups have their own accounts and legends of a global catastrophe in the form of a flood. To name a few, there is the Samo-Kubo tribe in New Guinea, the Athapascan Indians of America, the Papago Indians of Arizona, several Brazilian tribes, Peruvian Indians, African Hottentots, natives of Greenland, native Hawaiian Islanders, Hindus, Chinese, Egyptians, Greeks, Persians, Babylonians, Australian natives, the Welsh, Celts, Druids, Siberians, and Lithuanians. Literally every part of our world has in their history an account of the flood. There are more than 200 cultures that give their accounting of the flood, and even on Joe Rogan's podcast, he has had several paleontologists and historians come on that talk about how, especially in recent discoveries, there has been an incredible amount of evidence to talk about, or that shows the reality of a global flood that triggered our last ice age. All of those tribes and Indians and different parts of the world have these things in common. 88% of them describe a favored family that survived. 70% of them attribute survival to a boat. 95% say the sole cause of the catastrophe was a flood. 66% say that the disaster is due to man's wickedness. 67% record that animals were also saved. 57% describe that the survivors end up on a mountain, and many of the accounts also specifically mention birds being sent out, a rainbow, and 8 persons being saved. One thing interesting etymologically, which means the history of words, is you look at some of these Chinese symbols that are up there, that the Chinese symbol for boat comes from the combination of, if you can read it, it's hard to read, it comes from the combination of vessel, 8, and people. Vessel, 8, and people is the Chinese symbol for boat. Isn't that interesting? Or for flood, comes from the combination of water and the symbol for total, but that also is a combination of symbols of together, earth, and eight. The Chinese language is one of the, considered to be one of the most ancient languages in the entire world, and I just think it's really interesting that everywhere you look, as much as people want to claim that the flood, this is just a fairy tale, this is not. There's no evidence for the fact that there was a flood. And in fact, there is a huge amount of evidence that the biblical account of a global flood was true. It says that the mountains were covered. Obviously, if the mountains are covered, that would take a tremendous amount of water. There is, people would say, well, there's just simply not enough water on our planet in order to do this. But if you were, what the scientists tell me is that if the Earth, like the land on the earth, were a perfect sphere. We know that it's not, right? That's why we have dry land today, is because there's parts of it where we live that are high above the oceans and the waters. But if you were to level out all of the land on the earth, there'd be so much water that all of the land would be covered by 2.5 miles of water. That just shows you how deep the oceans go and how much water is in there. So this assertion that, there just simply isn't enough water on the earth for it to be covered is not true. This the 2.5 miles in the biblical account that we just read, it says that it rose only 15 cubits above the peaks of the mountains. And also, one thing we need to consider as well, in the pre-flood, perhaps the Earth's mountains were not as dramatic as they are today. What we view, we think of, I think when anyone thinks like 15 cubits above the peaks of the mountains, like above Mount Everest, so Mount Everest might not have been a thing. That Mount Everest might have been created through the flood and all of the aftermath that we've seen. It says that all the living creatures on the land died. I think it's interesting that it specifically notes that it's the animals that are on the land that died, that it wasn't every living creature on the entire planet, because obviously those creatures that lived in the water, the fish, the sea mammals, dolphins, whales, stuff like that, they would have been fine. In fact, they would have been living their best life during that time. Common questions asked by skeptics about the flood. I don't know if Marshall covered these with you guys last week, and if he did, then this will be review. But one common question is that the ark would not have been big enough to hold all of the animals. And I don't know where this comes from, because I think just, you just take the math of this whole thing, and the ark was a gigantic boat. Maybe it's because we play with the little stuffed animal ark in the nursery, and it's like, there's no way, right? But the ark was gigantic. The dimensions we are given, right? Because that's what God told Noah to build it. The length would have been 300 cubits, the width 50 cubits, and the height 30 cubits. What's a cubit? From elbow to fingertip, right? And so most of our cubits would be the same, but there would be a variation in there. For most people, it's 18, but even if you took an even more conservative number, the ones that I ran this off of was 17 and a half. Let's say we just go, maybe Noah and his family, they were, short-statured people. And so even if you go 17 and a half inches, you take those dimensions, it would have been 1.39 million cubic feet. Or, that's hard to imagine, right? 1.39 million cubic feet. The easy way to think about that is 522 railroad boxcars, all stacked on top of each other, all put together. This would have been gigantic, how big this boat was. Next question is, but can you still get two of every kind on the boat? And Rod, this goes back to what you were talking about. It's two of every species, not every sub-breed within that species. Noah wouldn't be going out and finding, two golden retrievers and two Rottweilers and two wolves. It would have been two canines, right? And so that shrinks it, but still, you're looking at a large grouping of animals. In the Principles of Systematic Zoology textbook, land animals are divided as such: 3,700 mammals, 8,600 birds, 6,300 reptiles, and 2,500 amphibians. Amphibians, some of them might have been okay in the water, some of them might have needed to be on the ark, but we'll just take the whole number. That's a total of 21,100 different species that needed room aboard the ark. You multiply that by 2 for all the unclean animals, 7 for all of the clean animals. You arrive approximately at 50,000 animals that needed residence on the ark for the duration. Can you get, though, 50,000 animals into 522 boxcars? If you average out the size of all of those animals to the size of a sheep, right? I think that is, we're not being, one way or the other. If you average each one out to the size of a sheep, knowing that, some of these lizards and birds would have been a fraction of that, and the amount of animals that are much larger than sheep are actually not that many in the animal kingdom, okay? So if you average out the size of all those animals to around the size of a sheep, 522 boxcars can hold 125,000 of these sheep-sized animals. Would there be enough room? Absolutely. I mean, and this is just simple math that we're talking about here, that shows there would have been plenty of room for these animals. Next question. Would Noah have enough time to build a boat that big? I mean, if we're talking about something that gigantic, something of a boat, and considering that they were probably using primitive tools to build this, and even if they weren't able to hire out some of this work to whether it be slaves or employees or people that could have been paid, if it's just Noah and his 3 sons, someone did the math on this. This was not me. They said that 4 men would be able to cut, dress, and install 15 cubic feet of gopher wood per day. They would need a total of 380,000 cubic feet of wood to complete the ark. And if they worked 6 days a week, then they would have been able to complete the ark in 81 years. So that's still enough time for them to, take family vacation in there. And but would there be enough time? Sure. Absolutely. And those are conservative numbers. Next question. but when they get on the ark with 8 people, would they be able to feed and water and clean up after that many animals? Well, number one, if we're taking into account the supernatural here, and that God could have caused a hibernation state to fall upon some of these or all of these animals, so it would have been easier to feed them and also to clean up after them. But even if you didn't, this guy John Wood Morapi he wrote a book, and in that book he did all of the math that demonstrated how it could be done using basically 80 man hours per day. 80 man hours per day. Well, how many people are on the boat? 8. Weird. Isn't that weird? So working a 10-hour day, 8 people would definitely have enough time to feed and water and clean up after that many animals. But the question that I always get when talking about the flood and Noah's Ark is what? Any guesses? Rod?
Geological evidence.
No, that's not it, Rod.
That's not it.
That's a good question, though. Question that I always get is what?
To say, how did they keep the lions from eating the sheep, et cetera, et cetera?
With the tasers. Obviously. That is not the question, but that is a good question. Ben?
Animal waste.
Animal waste. Where is it going? Right, because the ark shut up. Right, they're where are they putting all this waste? And I mean, and for that matter, animal waste. What about human waste? Right, I mean, we're animals too. They got to be going somewhere for the days that they were on the ark. That's not the question, but that's a good question.
Food and water. Enough food.
Enough food and water.
I was gonna say
Yep.
food and water too.
Food and water. Where did all this food and water come from?
Reproduction.
Were the animals reproducing during this time? Well, I mean, they were on there for about a year in total. I mean, you'd think maybe one cycle of reproduction in there, maybe it would have stressed them out a little bit. The question that I always get, these are great guesses, by the way, and I'm not going to cover any of those. I'm not going to answer any of those questions. The question that I always get is, what about the dinosaurs? You ever hear that one? Right? Like, have you ever seen, like, gone to the museum and just seen how huge a T-Rex was? And that's not to mention the, what do you call it? Is it the Brontosaurus or Brachiosaurus? I know one of those is wrong. They renamed it after a certain amount of time. But what do you think? Were there dinosaurs on the ark? Yeah, they were in pre-omelet form then. And that, well, I don't say the eggs, but like getting these, whether you classify them as reptiles or birds, on the ark, if you took them in a smaller form, they would have been much easier for all of that, storage, feeding, waste, all of it would have been much easier. And then the question after that is like, well, then what happened to them? If they were on the ark, then why don't we have them around today? All of those dinosaurs are considered superfauna, which means that they need a lot of sustenance in order to survive. And considering that there was most likely, there was an ice age at a certain time, and most creationists put that ice age right after the flood, because a global catastrophe like that would probably trigger an ice age that they most likely did not survive through that, being superfauna, not having enough food to eat, and the conditions of the world after that point would not have been suitable for them to survive. Any other questions that I'm not going to answer today about the ark?
While I'm sitting here reading your slides, and we've got 50,000 animals all coming to the ark, it really made me wonder how many people were thinking, what's this line of animals doing here? Because even if it took a year for them to get there and they're not all on the boat, there's still 50,000 animals hanging out to get on the boat. Unless they all, because it would physically take time to get there. So I kind of doubt that God would just zap them from point A to point B. I mean, he absolutely could have, but other people would have noticed that this was happening. They would have seen it outside of the giant boat that Noah was building. They would see the animals coming too.
Yeah. It makes you really wonder, and we don't get any indication outside of Noah's family of like what was the general feeling of mankind at this time of Noah building this. I mean, I don't even know if he called it a boat, right? It was just a structure that was gigantic, and then all of these animals coming to them. If would that have started making people question of like, oh, what? Maybe Noah is saying, preaching the truth here. But we know only him and his family were the ones to make it on the ark. Rod, did you have any?
I was gonna say, I don't know if it tells us where he built the ark. In a populated area, or was it out in the
Backyard.
One
of those backyard projects. He was one of those neighbors.
So I just want to tell you that my notes say 50 dinosaur kinds, eggs and younger ones, all would fit nicely into 208 storage cars and using 36% capacity of the 560 barrel.
You said 50 dinosaur types?
Call them kinds.
Dinosaur kinds? Okay. And Jeremy, you
strange questions that we would like to have the answer of. One of them is, not the 2 million Jews walk across the Red Sea in a short amount of time. But I don't know. A lot of this, if you attribute what God did, the first verse of chapter 8 said God dried the land up in just a short period of time. And how could he do that if there was billions of gallons of water on how long it takes for a flood to actually dry?
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to put the supernatural, you have to put God's working inside these stories, or they won't ever fit.
Yeah. And I agree with that. I mean, we're talking about a global flood here, right? Obviously, being believers in God's word, we don't discount the supernatural. But for those skeptics that might and just be like, there's no possible way, because we're dealing with physical dimensions here for this not to work. I think if you do the math, it works out quite nicely. In fact, let's move on to chapter 8, verses 1 through 5. So everything's on the ark now, and it says, verse 1, but God remembered Noah and all the beasts and all the livestock that were with him in the ark, and God made a wind blow over the earth, and the waters subsided. The fountains of the deep and the windows of the heavens were closed, the rain from the heavens were restrained, and the waters receded from the earth continually. At the end of 150 days, the waters had abated. And in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark came to rest in the mountains of Ararat, and the waters continued to abate until the 10th month, and in the 10th month, on the first day of the month, the tops of the mountains were seen. It says that God remembered Noah. So, was there a time where God forgot Noah? That he, oh yeah, that guy. I think this is more of like not a literal picture of God in human terms, but a statement of God then turned his attention back towards Noah after this time of rain and flood and death. That now his active attention would be turned back towards Noah, and he turns the fan on, and it starts blowing over the earth and starts drying up all this water. In verses 6 through 12, like we have been seeing up to this point in Genesis, all of this, again, we get some Hebrew literature stuff going on here of like a general statement being made, and then we get the details provided us after the fact, and we get more details here. Verses 6 through 12, it says, at the end of 40 days, Noah opened the window of the ark that had been made and sent forth a raven. It went to and fro until the waters were dried up from the earth. Then he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters had subsided from the face of the ground. But the dove found no place to set her foot, and she returned to him to the ark, for the waters were still on the face of the whole earth. So he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark with him. He waited another 7 days, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. The dove came back to him in the evening, and behold, in her mouth was a freshly plucked olive leaf. So Noah knew that the waters had subsided from the earth. Then he waited another 7 days and sent forth the dove, and she did not return to him anymore. So 150 days or 40 days? What is being talked about here? Well, the rains that created the flood lasted 40 days. Then the waters prevailed on the earth another 100, or through that, a total of 150 days. And after 150 days, the waters gradually receded. We see that first 5 verses, again, the general statement of this is kind of the general outline of how things happened. And then at 6 and beyond, we get the details of this is how that happened along the way. We get the story about the raven and the doves. It says that he sends forth a raven, and it doesn't return. Most likely, ravens are scavenger creatures, and so this either meant that the raven found a place to rest and feed upon the dead or the floating carcasses or whatnot, but we don't get told that. It just says, in fact, it just says that it went out, didn't come back. Then he sends forth a dove, didn't find a place to land. The dove would not have landed on the earth until it was dry, until it found a suitable place to land. Noah waits another 7 days, sends out the dove again, and it comes back with a freshly picked olive leaf. Does anyone have a olive branch in their version? Okay. That is a common misconception, because the dove with the olive branch in its beak or in its talons, that's the symbol for peace, right? And so many people get in their minds, like, oh, it's coming back with this olive branch because I've seen the pictures of that before. But try to think about that of how's this dove coming back with an olive branch? It was a leaf, freshly plucked, it says. But ever since then, because of this account of the olive tree and the dove being connected here, that doves and olive trees has always symbolized peace. And after God's judgment here against mankind had ceased, he was once again at peace with all mankind. Verses 13 through 19. It says, in the 601st year, in the first month, in the first day of the month, the waters were dried from off of the earth. And Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. In the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth had dried out. Then God said to Noah, go out from the ark, you and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing that is with you, of all flesh, birds and animals, and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that they may swim on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. So Noah went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, every bird, everything that moves on the earth went out by families from the ark. Noah and his family have spent almost an entire year in the ark before they depart. And they were to go out and repopulate the earth once again. And then in verses 20 through 22, we get the end of the chapter and also the beginning of God's covenant with Noah. It says, then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. And when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man. For the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth, neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. I think it's interesting here that Noah's first act after they get off the ark is to worship. They worship God in the form of sacrifice, and it says that he took every clean animal and every clean bird. That would have been very costly when you're thinking of the numbers that they had up to this point, and the fact that they're going to need these animals to repopulate the earth, but then also use them for food and clothing and all of these things, to take them even just one from their number and sacrifice them. And I think this is the idea that we should have when it comes to true sacrifice for God, that it should be costly. With only whether you take it of 7 or 7 pairs of the animals on the ark, Noah risked extinction by sacrificing some of these animals, but also demonstrated a great amount of faith in God and in knowing what he wanted, and being able to see them through the coming months and years and decades that it would take to repopulate. Noah's costly sacrifice, though, it says that it pleased God. It says the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma. And I think, when it says that we are made in the image of God, that also might be a part of it, because who doesn't love the smell of flesh grilling on the barbecue, right? Like, love that smell. But we get God's promise here. God promised never again to visit the earth with judgment by a flood on this scale to destroy every living thing. And God promised that after the flood there would be established seasons now that would be new to them. And the result of this change is found in the rapidly decreasing lifespans, because now they have, you know, the rainy season and the dry season and the cold season and all of this to deal with as well. Jerry, you had your hand.
Mention of all the.
Is that true?
What is my importance of this?
Cain and Abel.
Well, I'm trying to think of if Cain and Abel's account, if that mentioned an altar, or if it just mentioned the sacrifice. It might have just mentioned the sacrifice. You know, mine only talks about an offering. Interesting. Why is that interesting to you, Jerry?
Cain and Abel did something.
Me too.
But the thing is, God didn't command this was a free will offering of Noah.
So along those lines, thinking, it's not like they've got the law yet, right? Because that happened at the Exodus. So how does Noah know what's clean and what's not clean?
See, so we know clean and unclean retrospectively.
Retrospectively, right? Because we can read Genesis and Exodus at the same time. We assume that he must have been told. Just like we assume, you think about, why was Cain's sacrifice unacceptable? Because it'd be kind of unfair for God to be like, this is unacceptable. And it's like, God, you never told, we didn't receive any guidance on this. We assume that there was guidance. That there was, during this time of the patriarchs, that there was guidance handed down from father to father to father about how each family should worship. Because we're about to get into some interesting things when it comes to altars and sacrifice and stuff like that. And we have that same question of where'd this come from, right? And especially in the story of Abraham and Isaac, we assume that something similar like that has been happening up to this point, or up to their point of God just telling them, this is what I want you to do. Take this animal, sacrifice it this way at this point in the world. And so that's the assumption that we make, just given with the information that we've been given. We're going to continue on into chapter 9 next week, because God has more things to say, and there's actually some answers to some of the questions that were asked today, and clarifications that will be interesting to get into next week. Let's pray. Beth.
If you have another slide, then let's do the chapter.
Have another slide? Nope.
All right, let's pray, and then I'm going to go get a cough drop. Dear Heavenly Father, God, thank you so much for this time that we can look into your word, we can study it. God, thank you for how clear and precise your word is, that when we think about the numbers and how precise you were, that we can trust your word, and God, thank you so much for it. Help us to become better students of it. God, help us to increase our faith in you, in doing what you have told us to do. God, please be with us now as we enter into this time of worship. Help us to clear out any distractions in our minds and focus on what we're here to do. We love you. It's in your Son's name that I pray. Amen.